Okay, today we're going to be discussing the determinants of demand. And in order for you to follow along with this lesson, you'll need to have your study guide. What's the second part of your study guide, and it's going to look like this. But you're also going to need your determinants of demand notes handout that I gave you today. Okay, so let's begin. The determinants of demand. So first of all, let's review this concept of ceteris paribus. That means other things being constant. This was what was added to the end of the law of demand. And according to the law of demand, what is the only variable that the law of demand accounts for? It only accounts for changes in price, which means everything else in the marketplace, everything else can't be considered to have changed in order for the law of demand to be in effect. So as prices go up, quantity demanded goes down. As prices go down, quantity demanded goes up. Anything else that changes, it causes something else besides a change in quantity demanded. And so that's what we're going to look at today. Things that change demand rather than quantity demanded. So other variables that are not accounted for in the law of demand include changes in taste, changes in prices of other goods that are related goods, changes in people's income, even changes in the weather. These things are not accounted for in the law of demand. And so we have to see how those things will affect the entire demand curve as opposed to just quantity demanded. So this goes into your study guide. A shift in demand is the graphical representation of the effect of anything other than the price on demand or quantity demanded. So make sure that you get this in your study guide in the first link. All right. So let's review what we mean when we say a change in quantity demanded. All right, this is what we graphed yesterday at the end of class. Here we have price 1, and that price represents 1 point along the demand curve. And if that price goes up, then we can see that the quantity demanded goes up. Again, quantity demanded is just 1 point along the curve. And you know what the curve is made up of because we did a class experiment where we built a demand curve based on the demand of classmates for a soda. But as price goes up, we have a change in quantity demanded, meaning one change of a point along the demand curve. So price changes are built into the demand curve. But a change in demand is viewed differently. Change of demand can be caused by changes in the marketplace, like changes in taste or changes in preferences, changes in the weather. And a change in demand, meaning things that are not price related. The price goes up, price goes down. That's just a change in quantity demanded. A change in demand is an actual shift of the entire curve. As you can see here, the yellow represents where demand was, D1, that's where our original demand curve, but something changed besides price of the product. And now we have a completely different curve that has moved to the left, and that's called a decrease in demand. This shift of the entire demand curve to the left. So changes in determinants of demand, and we're going to learn a list of determinants of demand. By the way, this term, determinants of demand, is one that we'll say over and over again, but for some reason people always miss it on the test. You guys end up learning all the different determinants of demand, but you end up not remembering that they are called determinants of demand. So those of you who like A's, keep in mind this is a word that will come up on the test that many people miss. So some determinants of demand that we're going to go over today include changes in consumer income. That means your income. Change in the number of buyers, meaning the change of a population or change of a specific type of population. Changes in taste. We styles come and go, and that affects demand and shifts that curve to left and right. Changes in the price of related good. So this is a change of price, but not of the good itself. It's a change of price of a substitute good or a complementary good. And then changes in consumer expectations for future prices. Again, this isn't a change in price, it's what people expect to happen in the future, and that can shift the demand curve to the left or the right. Okay, so you want to have your determinants of demand notes open and available. And so this is the first example we're looking at, the number of consumers increase, which I believe is that's the first one on your determinants of demand notes. So when the number of consumers increase, this causes the entire demand curve to shift to the right. We see here D1 is where the demand curve used to be. And then the second curve gets drawn here and labeled D2 because more people are available to buy something. And therefore, more things get purchased. There's a higher demand. If this had been a change in price, again, that would have just been a change along one curve. But this is not. This is something else. So let's take, and then in the opposite, the number of consumers decrease. It could be, there's, for example, in Paradise, California, the demand for everything decreased when there was mass exodus. A lot of people lost their homes, they had to leave the area. All of a sudden there's a demand decrease for everything, hamburgers, clothing, etc. There's no demand because the population has decreased significantly. Well, there's some demand, but relatively little compared to what it was before the fires in Paradise. So let's try some examples. If the number of consumers in the market for a product increases, the demand for the product will what? If the number of consumers in the market for a product decrease, then the demand for the product will what? For example, if a new high school is built in the same block as a fast food restaurant, okay, so now we have an increased population available for that market. The demand for fast food restaurants products will what? Increase or decrease? Increase. And so what will happen if the demand for that fast food increases, what's going to happen to that curve? As we saw earlier, is that curve going to shift to the right, or is that curve going to shift to the left? If an automobile manufacturing plant near the fast food restaurant closes, the demand for the restaurant's products will do what? So here we have this huge factory and it closes. All those employees are no longer around. What's going to happen? Demand will decrease. And so what is that going to look like on the graph? Is that curve, that whole demand curve, is going to shift to the left, or is it going to shift to the right? Okay, now circle the number of consumers. How is this related? Is this related inversely or directly? If you answered direct, you would be correct. As the numbers go up, as the consumers go up, the demand increases. As the number of consumers go down, demand decreases. That's a direct relationship, as opposed to in the law of demand, as prices go up, quantity demanded goes down. That's an inverse relationship, but this is not. This is a direct relationship. Okay. Oops. All right, next. If a product becomes more preferred or needed by consumers, this is going to cause an increase in demand. If a product becomes less preferred or needed by consumers, it will decrease demand, meaning it'll shift that demand curve to the left. Increase in demand shifts the demand curve to the right. You can see this demand curve moving this way. It's an increase. Okay, so for example, this would happen if, say, a particular type of clothing went out of style. I'm sure you can think of something that was popular when you were a kid that isn't popular anymore. That would be an example of this kind of shift. When a new style comes in, a new type of jewelry, a new type of shoes, a new brand of car, when that becomes stylish, that's where you're going to see demand curve moving this way. It could also be a change in the weather. If when the weather gets cold, all of a sudden, what happens to the demand for uh, cool weather clothing like coats? This is what happens. And when the demand, right now, things are starting to warm up, so those coats, there's a decrease in demand for those coats. They're less preferred because they're less useful. So, review: consumer tastes and preferences for a product change. Demand for the product will change. Okay, so here we go. If fashion and celebrity magazines and websites are showing short skirts, the demand for short skirts will do what? Increase or decrease? And so what is that going to do to the demand curve? Is it going to shift to the right, or is it going to shift to the left? If fashion and celebrity magazines and websites show few pictures of Omega watches, or fewer pictures of Omega watches than they used to, demand for these watches will do what? And what's going to happen to the demand curve? Is it going to shift to the right, or is it going to shift to the left? So in your cheat sheet, circle the correct answer. Oops, wrong one. Is this an inverse or direct relationship? If you answer direct, you're correct. All right, next one. Now, normal goods. This is something that needs to go into your study guide, the definition for normal goods, and I think it's down here. So, normal goods. Any goods for which demand increases when income increases and fall when income decreases. And that's just the way generally we think things work. If all of a sudden there's a huge tax break and everybody has a bunch of extra money coming in their paychecks, for normal goods, people will end up buying more of them. For example, steak dinners. If all of a sudden the whole population has more money to spend, Cattleman's is going to have more business. There's going to be a higher demand for steak dinners. And vice versa. If taxes were to go up, everyone's going to have a lot less money to spend, and demand, for example, for Cattleman's will go down, will shift to the left. That's how normal goods work. Any good or service whose demand behaves according to the law of demand, normally. So now inferior goods, one good example of inferior goods tends to be what I grew up calling generic, but I believe here in California, oh, I forget what you guys call these kinds of goods, like great value goods or off-brand. I believe you guys call it off-brand. Off-brand goods is what we consider a inferior good in economics because they behave the opposite of normal goods. Smucker's is a normal good. Great value strawberry jam is an inferior good. So what is an normal good? Some examples: new cars, sit-down restaurant food, brand name goods and services, new clothes, fresh vegetables. Sorry. Now, these examples of normal goods, you're going to put those in this guide that we've been filling in down here in this box where it says examples of normal goods. Put some of those examples in there, and that will help you when you're studying. So with a normal good, as consumer income, meaning as you have more money to spend, let's say you get a raise or taxes are decreased or it's income tax refund season, with normal goods, the demand will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right for those goods. And with normal goods, demand decreases as consumer income decreases. All of a sudden, let's say a factory goes out of business in the area. All of a sudden, normal goods, the demand for normal goods will decrease because people can't afford to buy them. So in your cheat sheet, now we want to take a look at the relationship between consumer income and demand. And we can see that's what kind of relationship? That's a direct relationship, not an inverse relationship. Now, when it comes to inferior goods, these actually work in the opposite way. This goes into your study guide for inferior goods. Any goods for which demand decreases when income increases and increases when income decreases. So it works in the opposite way of normal goods. In other words, any good or service whose demand behaves inversely to the law of demand. So used car or public transportation. If you generally in our country, you're going to only use public transportation if you can't afford your own car. Now, there are some people who are very environment conscious and they use public transportation for that reason, or they don't like getting stuck in traffic. They'd rather read a book. And so for those few people, public transportation, they're used whether they have a lot of money or not. But generally in our country, we won't use public transportation if we can afford something else. So public transportation is one of those things where the more money we have, the less we use it. So it works inversely to normal goods. Fast food, generally, if we can afford to get something healthier, we will. McDonald's really is not particularly healthy, but a lot of times we use it because we can't afford something better. Although some could argue, no, it's just they're very convenient, and fair enough. But secondhand clothing, again, generally, there are a few people who just love secondhand clothing because they like vintage. But for the most part, secondhand clothing is used because you can't afford something better. And so the more someone has income, the less they're going to buy secondhand clothing, the more they're going to buy normal goods like brand new clothing. Off-brand, as we said before, this is an example of inferior goods, generic canned vegetables as opposed to fresh vegetables. And I know students hate it when I bring this up, but top ramen noodles and boxed mac and cheese, these are things that are considered to be inferior goods. Generally, families do, in fact, buy less of these things when they can afford healthier options. And so those examples of inferior goods need to go into this study guide here for examples of inferior goods. All right, so again, as consumers have more money to spend, they actually buy less of inferior goods. And as consumers have less money to spend, they actually buy more of inferior goods, and demand shifts to the right. And so that's what kind of relationship. Let's take a look at that. What kind of relationship is? As income goes up, demand goes down. That is a what kind of relationship? Inverse. That's an inverse relationship. So inferior goods, there's an inverse relationship between income and demand. So let's practice this a bit. Okay. So we're talking about normal goods right now, not inferior goods. If the consumer income increases, demand for most goods and services will do what? If consumer income decreases, demand for normal goods and services will do what? For example, if workers at a manufacturing facility sign a new contract that provides a 5% raise, these workers will have more income and their demand for goods and services, for normal goods and services, for example, their demand for Pepsi, will do what? Correct. If Social Security taxes increase for employees, consumers will have less take-home pay, and as a result, their demand for normal goods and services like Pepsi or Coca-Cola will do what? Alrighty, now inferior goods. So if consumer income increases. Demand for inferior goods and services will do what? Decrease. That inverse relationship we talked about. If consumer income decreases, demand for inferior goods and services will do what? For example, if workers at a manufacturing facility sign a new contract that provides a 5% raise, these workers will have more money to purchase healthy food. So the demand for top ramen will do what? If Social Security taxes increase for employees and consumers will have less take-home pay, as a result, their demand for top ramen will do what? Top ramen is an inferior good. All right, so as we put in our cheat sheet, that's an inverse relationship. Next determinant of demand. Change in price of related goods. Related goods include substitute goods and complementary goods and services. So let's see here. I believe, yes, substitute good and complementary good, you need to get that information there in your study guide as we go through these. So substitute goods, let's start with that. So these are products similar enough that they can replace each other. So put that in your study guide, and then the examples will go down in the bottom of this cheat sheet. So some examples. Bread, and I know you guys don't think about this, but different starches. So let's say instead of rice at a meal, your mother might cook potatoes, or instead of potatoes might cook pasta. And some households substitute bread for those two starches. So those are examples of substitute goods. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, although I know a lot of you feel fiercely strong about Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Another example of substitute goods, a Toyota Corolla versus a Honda Civic. They're virtually the exact same market. If there's a huge price drop in Toyota Corolla, people are going to go for the Toyota Corolla as opposed to the Honda Civic. They're substitutes for one another. Another examples that can go in your guide in terms of Nike versus Adidas are substitute goods. Dutch Bros versus Starbucks. Any of your green vegetables can substitute each other. So those are some examples of substitute goods. If a good has a substitute and the price of that substitute decreases, what do you think is going to happen to the demand for the good that didn't decrease in price? It's going to decrease. People aren't going to want that as much. Here we've got this perfectly good substitute and its price has dropped tremendously. Let's go with that other thing rather than the good we're talking about. So the demand for the good whose price did not change will decrease, meaning did not decrease, will decrease. If a good has a substitute and the price of that substitute increases, that's going to increase demand for that good. So for example, if the price of Adidas goes sky high, people are going to buy Nike instead, or something else. So this is easier to see when we actually put it in a curve. Demand for the good whose price did not change will decrease. So let's try. let's practice this really quickly. Imagine that you are graphing, let's say, the demand for Starbucks. Okay, imagine you're graphing demand for Starbucks. So Starbucks is at the title of your demand curve. All right. Now let's say there is an increase in the price of Dutch Brothers coffee. Okay, all of a sudden Dutch Brothers coffee doubles its prices. If we're graphing Starbucks, what's going to happen to the demand for Starbucks? Is it going to increase or decrease as a result of Dutch Brothers doubling their prices? Okay, some more practice. A decrease in the price of BMW sedans would cause a what in the demand for a comparable Lexus? Okay, an increase in the price of iPhones would cause a what in the demand for comparable Samsung Galaxy phones? Price of a good and the demand for a substitute good are positively related. So you need to indicate that in your study guide where you're deciding whether they're inversely or directly related. So substitute goods, they're directly related. Now, another related good are what we call complementary goods and services. Goods or services that are typically used together. Examples are peanut butter and jelly. Those are complementary goods. We tend to use them in tandem. Toothpaste, toothbrushes, these are complementary goods. If you can't have one, it's kind of hard to do something with the other. All the makings of a hamburger buns and hamburger meat. These are complementary goods, and the price of one is going to affect the demand of the other. Motor oil and gasoline and cars. The price of one, in fact, affects petroleum products, definitely affect the demand of cars. Batteries and remote control cars, these are complementary goods. So, with complementary goods, if the price of a good increases, demand for its complementary good will decrease. So if the price of hamburger goes through the roof, demand for hamburger buns will go down because people are going to be buying less hamburger meat, which also means they're also going to be buying less hamburger buns. So that's how that works. Same with if the price of a good decreases, demand for its complementary good will increase. So if the price of peanut butter goes way down, makes it much more affordable, people aren't just going to be buying more peanut butter, they're also going to be buying more jelly. And so the demand for jelly will actually go up if the price of peanut butter goes down. So some examples: a decrease in the price of strawberries will cause a what in the demand for whipped cream? Increase. An increase in the price of hamburger will cause a blank in the demand for hamburger buns. The price of a good and the demand for a complementary good are inversely related. So make sure you indicate that here on complementary goods. Circle the inverse. Oh, and I forgot to remind you to get some examples of complementary goods in this box in your study guide. I'll go back to that slide so you can get that in there. It's like hamburger buns, toothpaste, toothbrush, peanut butter jelly. Those are things you want to get in your examples. Okay. All right. Another determinant of demand are consumer expectations. So, I believe that's the very last page. If, for example, this is the example I always use first. If you expect the price of gas to double tomorrow, you hear a rumor that the filling stations are going to double their prices tomorrow. What's going to happen? So that's an expectation of a future price change. What's going to happen today? What are people going to do? They're going to rush out and fill up their gas tanks. So expectation of a price raise in the future causes demand for gas in this moment to go what? up or down, increase or decrease. It's going to cause the demand for gas now to increase. So, as the expectation of the price to go up in the future, demand now increases. If consumers expect the price to go down in the future, demand right now, we'll wait for that. If we hear that next week there's going to be a huge sale on whatever the thing is that we want, we're not going to buy it today. We're going to wait for that sale. So demand in the present will actually go down for that product as we wait for that sale that we expect to come. So change in expectation of price is the fifth determinant of demand. So for example, if consumers expect the price of gas to double in a week, will they buy more or less gas now? If consumers expect the price of laptops to be cut by half next month, will they buy more or less laptops now? What will happen to demand? Less. So the demand has done what? All right. So in your cheat sheet, take a look at this. What kind of relationship is this in terms of the consumer expectation of the price going up? That's going to do what to demand now? It's going to go up. So that is which? Inverse or direct? It's a direct relationship. Okay. More practice. There's a quiz for you to practice these concepts.